What if I told you that behind the rusted gates of an old, forgotten mansion, there are still eyes watching from the dark? People in the town say no one has lived there for decades, yet windows slam shut when there's no wind. Shadows pass across the halls where no footsteps echo. And those who've dared to enter say they've heard voices whispering their names. Tonight, we're going inside the abandoned Blackwood Mansion. And once you hear what happened there, you'll never look at an empty house the same way again. The Blackwood Mansion had stood on the edge of Willow Creek for nearly a century. Built in 1912 by a wealthy railroad tycoon, its towering windows and grand staircases were once a symbol of luxury. But after a string of tragedies, mysterious deaths, disappearances, and finally a fire that blackened part of the west wing, the mansion was left to rot. Locals avoided it. Kids dared each other to touch the gates, but no one ever stepped inside for long. Rumors spread. Some swore they saw figures moving in the upper windows at night. Others claimed they heard a piano playing, even though the mansion had been silent for 50 years. One man thought it was all nonsense. His name was Daniel, and he was about to prove everyone wrong, or so he believed. Daniel was a young urban explorer with a YouTube channel of his own. He loved venturing into abandoned places, hospitals, factories, schools, and documenting what he found. When his subscribers began sending him links to the Blackwood Mansion, telling him it was the most haunted house in the state, he couldn't resist. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and nothing more than bravado, Daniel snuck in late one October night. The air was cold. The gates squealed as they opened, and the crunch of leaves under his boots echoed like gunshots in the silence. But once he stepped inside the front doors, everything changed. The smell of rot and dust was suffocating. Wallpaper peeled like dead skin, and yet, the air felt thick, as if the house itself knew he had arrived. And then the front doors slammed shut behind him. Daniel froze when the heavy doors slammed, the echo rolling through the empty halls like thunder. His first instinct was to laugh it off, to brush it away as some old draft, but the sound had been too sharp, too deliberate. Hayes' camera picked up the way his hand shook, the lens catching fragments of dust drifting in the dim glow of his flashlight. He muttered under his breath, trying to calm himself, but the silence that followed made his voice sound small, swallowed by the house. He forced himself forward, stepping into the grand foyer. The chandelier above him dangled at an odd angle, its crystal pieces broken and scattered across the floor. But for a second, just a second, he swore he saw the faint shimmer of candlelight inside it. He lifted his flashlight quickly, only to find empty glass and cobwebs. His breath fogged in the cold, though the night outside hadn't been nearly this bitter. The house seemed to breathe differently, colder, heavier, as if something unseen lingered in every corner. His boots clattered against the marble floor as he moved, the sound of each step magnified, rebounding off the walls. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. At the end of the hallway, an old mirror leaned against the wall, its surface cracked and spotted with age. Daniel raised the camera, filming it, but when he lowered the lens and looked with his own eyes, something was wrong. His reflection stood a half-second slower, blinking after he had already moved. He cursed under his breath and staggered back, the beam of his flashlight shaking. When he looked again, it was only his reflection, perfectly in sync. He tried to laugh for the camera to play it off his nerves, but the words caught in his throat. Every doorway seemed to gape like an open mouth. Every shadow looked too solid. He felt eyes on him, watching, tracking each step he took. It was as if the house itself shifted with his movements, its silence pressing closer, heavier, refusing to let him forget he was not alone. The deeper he went, the stranger it became. Dust coated everything, yet in one hallway, the floor was clean, as though someone had walked through recently. He bent down, aiming the light at faint scuff marks, leading toward a closed door at the end. His skin crawled. He wanted to tell himself it was just animals, or maybe other explorers, but something about those marks looked intentional. Almost like dragging, almost like something had been pulled across the wood. Daniel reached for the doorknob, hesitating as his palm hovered above it. The brass was cold, much colder than the air. He pulled his hand back, shaking it as though he had touched ice. But when he placed the camera closer, there was no frost, no moisture, just an unnatural chill that bit into his skin. His instincts screamed at him to turn around, but curiosity or pride forced him to push the door open. The hinges moaned, long and drawn out, like the wail of something waking from sleep. The room beyond was darker than the rest of the house, as if the light from his flashlight couldn't fully pierce the shadows. The beam revealed only glimpses: a broken chair in the corner, tattered curtains that swayed though no wind blew, and on the far wall, something scratched deep into the plaster. Words, uneven and jagged, carved by desperate hands. Daniel stepped closer, raising the camera to capture it. And that's when he realized the words formed a sentence. They never leave. At first, Daniel told himself it was the wind. He laughed nervously, turning his camera on. "See, guys? Nothing to be scared of," he whispered. But as he walked deeper into the mansion, he began to hear it. Soft voices, spurs that seemed to drift down the hallways. He called out, no answer. The whispers stopped. When he climbed the grand staircase, his flashlight flickered, sputtered at hand. For just a moment, he thought he saw someone standing at the top of the stairs. A pale figure, tall and thin. But when the light came back, the landing was empty. Daniel's heart pounded. He told himself he was imagining things. He kept recording. The whispers grew louder, circling him until one of them hissed directly in his ear. "Why are you here?" Daniel spun around so fast, the camera nearly slipped from his hand. The beam of his flashlight darted across the cracked walls and peeling wallpaper, but nothing was there. His breathing turned ragged, too loud in the suffocating silence. He whispered to himself, trying to believe it had only been his imagination, but deep down he knew the voice had been real, too close, too deliberate. His skin prickled as though someone stood just behind him, watching, waiting. He forced himself to keep climbing the staircase, each step creaking as if warning him to turn back. When he reached the top, the hall stretched longer than it should have, lined with doors that seemed to lean inward, looming. He lifted his camera, the red recording light blinking in the dark. But as he panned slowly across the corridor, one of the doors at the far end slammed shut on its own. The echo rolled through the house like a gunshot. Daniel swallowed hard and walked toward it, the floor groaning under his weight. His flashlight flickered again, and for a fraction of a second, caught sight of something darting across the hollow blur of white fabric. Gone before he could focus. "Okay." He muttered a curse under his breath, gripping the camera tighter. The whispers returned, low and overlapping, like a chorus of voices trapped behind the walls, their tones urgent and angry. He pressed his ear against the nearest door, and the voices stopped instantly, leaving a silence so complete it made his heart hammer even louder. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, finding a dusty bedroom inside. The bed frame was broken, the sheets long decayed, but the wardrobe against the wall stood strangely intact. His door was slightly ajar, just enough for darkness to spill out like a mouth waiting to swallow him whole. Daniel approached, his steps slow, deliberate. The air grew colder with each foot forward, his breath visible now in thin, white clouds. He reached out and pulled the wardrobe door open. Inside hung a single dress, black and frayed, swaying gently as though someone had just brushed past it. He stepped back quickly, shaking his head, whispering to the camera that it wasn't possible, that the air was still, that nothing could have made it move. But the dress kept swaying. Behind him, the floor creaked. Not from his movement, but from weight-heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching. He froze, listening, his eyes widening as the sound grew closer. He spun around, raising the flashlight, but the hallway was empty. His chest heaved with each shallow breath, and for the first time, doubt cracked his confidence. Maybe the mansion wasn't abandoned. He wasn't alone at all. As he steadied his grip on the camera, a faint knock echoed from deeper in the hallway. One knock, then another. And then, slow and rhythmic, a third. It wasn't random, it was calling him, pulling him forward like a lure in the dark. Daniel panicked. He tried to leave, but every hallway twisted into another, as if the house itself was shifting. He turned corners that should have led back to the front doors, but instead found new passages, new doors he didn't remember opening. That's when he stumbled on the hidden room. Behind a broken bookshelf, he discovered a narrow doorway leading to a small chamber. Inside was a dusty crib, a child's toy, and a diary, its pages yellowed and brittle. He opened, it tanned froze. The last entry read, "Father says the mansion must never be empty. Even if we are gone, someone must stay." And that's when Daniel heard the sound, a floorboard creaking directly behind him. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears as he slowly turned toward the sound. His flashlight beam wobbled across the cramped room, spilling light onto peeling wallpaper in the tiny crib. The air felt heavy, thick with a stench of mildew and something else, something metallic. He tried to tell himself it was rust, but the truth gnawed at him. It smelled like blood. He swallowed hard and stepped backward, nearly tripping on the cracked floorboards. His camera caught his whispered voice, trembling as he muttered that he needed to leave, that this was enough footage. But the door he had entered through was no longer there. The broken bookshelf now pressed flush against the wall, as though it had never moved. Panic surged through him. He clawed at the wall, pushing, pulling, desperate to open it again, but the wood wouldn't budge. His flashlight flickered, dimming, and in the darkness, he thought he saw something in the crib move, a small shift beneath the tattered blanket. He froze, his breath catching in his throat, and for several seconds, he didn't dare blink. Slowly, the blanket began to rise and fall, as though something beneath it was breathing. Daniel stepped closer against his better judgment, camera shaking in his grip. He leaned over, the beam of his flashlight trembling across the crib's surface. The blanket shifted again, but when he reached out with trembling fingers and yanked it back, the crib was empty. High-pitched laugh echoed from the corner of the room, soft and childlike, though no one was there. The sound made Daniel's skin crawl, and his legs nearly gave out beneath him. He stumbled back, bumping into the wall, the diary slipping from his hand and landing with a thud on the dusty floor. The pages fluttered open on their own, as if an invisible hand had flipped them. Daniel stared as the words began to darken, ink bleeding across the paper, letters twisted into new sentences. "You stay now." His stomach dropped, cold sweat dripping down the back of his neck. He tried to scream, but his voice cracked into silence. The laugh faded, replaced by slow, dragging footsteps above him, heavy enough to make dust sift down from the ceiling. Whatever it was moving toward him. Daniel pressed himself against the wall, sliding along it until he reached the corner of the room. His flashlight dimmed again, the circle of light shrinking, and in the shadows at the edge of the beam, he saw the outline of a figure. It was small at first, like a child, standing still. He whispered for it to stay back, though his voice shook with terror. The figure didn't move. It only tilted its head, impossibly slow, the shape of its neck bending farther than any human could. Daniel's knees weakened, his body screaming at him to run, but his mind refused to accept what he was seeing. Then, in a blink, the figure was gone. The flashlight flared bright again, revealing nothing but the cracked walls and the broken crib. Daniel spun in circles, scanning every corner of the room, his breath loud and ragged. Suddenly, the bookshelf scraped open with a groan, swinging wide as though inviting him out. He didn't hesitate. He bolted through the opening, sprinting down the dark corridor without daring to look back. His footsteps pounded, echoing off the walls, but beneath them he swore he heard others softer, quicker following just behind. He rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. The hallway ahead stretched on endlessly, lined with door after door, all slightly ajar. From each one seeped a faint glow, a pale, sickly light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Daniel lifted his camera, filming, his hand trembling so badly the footage shook. A whisper rose, not from one direction, but from every door at once. A chorus of voices, overlapping, some pleading, some angry, some laughing. Stay, stay, stay. Daniel clutched his head with one hand, trying to block it out, his flashlight beam darting wildly. One of the doors slammed shut with a deafening crack. Another burst open violently, revealing nothing but darkness inside. A freezing wind rushed out, knocking him off balance. The camera slipped from his grasp, clattering to the ground, but still recording. His tilted lens caught his terrified face as he scrambled to pick it up. The voices grew louder, merging into one deep, guttural growl that shook the hallway. Daniel stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a loose floorboard, when suddenly all the doors slammed shut at once. The sound was so violent it rattled the walls, dust raining down from the ceiling. Then silence, thick, suffocating silence. Daniel stood, frozen, chest heaving, staring down the endless corridor. His camera shook in his hand as he whispered that he had to get out, that he couldn't take another step. But in that silence, he heard it again breathing, not his own, deep, labored, and coming from directly behind him. He spun around, flashlight cutting through the dark, and found himself face to face with the woman in the black dress. Her eyes were hollow pits, her skin stretched tight over bone, and her lips curled into a grin that split her face unnaturally wide. She whispered one word, soft but sharp enough to pierce the air. Mine. Daniel screamed, the sound raw and desperate, and the camera tumbled once more to the floor. Its lens cracked, recording in fractured blurs as shadows engulfed him. The last image it caught was her hand, pale and clawed, reaching toward the light. The screen flickered. The recording cut to static. The camera was found weeks later on the mansion's front steps, its battery dead, its memory card nearly full. No trace of Daniel was ever discovered, though neighbors claimed they sometimes heard screams carried on the night wind from inside the mansion's walls. And to this day, if you stand close enough to the gates, you might hear the faint click of a camera shutter echoing from the darkness within. Would you step through those doors? Would you dare to test if the mansion has room for one more? Slowly, Daniel turned. His flashlight beam shook. Standing in the doorway was a figure. A woman in a tattered black dress, her skin pale as ash, her eyes dark pits, her head tilted unnaturally as she stared at him. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. This is my home. Daniel tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat. The figure stepped closer, closer, until her cold breath brushed against his cheek. And then, the camera dropped to the floor. The last thing recorded was Daniel's flashlight rolling in circles, catching glimpses of her feet dragging across the floor. Before the screen went black, Daniel was never seen again. All that remained was his camera found weeks later on the front steps of the mansion, still recording. The police who recovered the camera never released the full footage to the public. The parts they did reveal showed nothing more than Daniel entering the house, his nervous jokes, and then several hours of black screen with faint scratching and breathing sounds. The rest, they claimed, was corrupted, but locals whispered that the authorities had locked the rest of the tape away because what it showed wasn't meant for human eyes. Neighbors reported strange activity in the days after Daniel disappeared. Lights flickered in the broken windows, though there was no electricity. Curtains that had rotted away years ago seemed to sway as if something stood behind them. One man swore he saw a figure standing at the top of the staircase in the front hall, staring out through the cracked glass at the street below. Late at night, drivers passing on the road nearby would sometimes see the gates wide open, swinging slowly as though inviting them in. But when they looked again in the rearview mirror, the gates were closed. A few claimed they even saw Daniel himself, or something wearing his shape, walking along the edge of the property with the same shaky camera in his hands. The legend grew darker with each retelling. Teenagers dared each other to spend a night inside, but none lasted more than a few minutes. The ones who made it back spoke of whispers calling their names, of icy hands brushing their arms, of doors closing behind them no matter how quickly they ran. One girl returned with deep scratches across her back, though she swore nothing had touched her. An old woman in the town claimed she knew the truth. She said the Blackwood family had made a pact that, as long as someone remained in the mansion, the family's misfortune would never spread to the town. When the family was gone, the house would keep its own resident, pulling in anyone foolish enough to enter. Daniel, she whispered, was simply the newest one chosen. The mansion still stands, crumbling, yet defiant. The town wants to tear it down, but every attempt fails. Contractors refuse to work there. Machinery breaks without explanation, and once a demolition worker vanished after entering to inspect the structure. No one has tried since, and so it waits. Behind those gates, beneath that rotting roof, the house keeps its secret. Some say it hungers. Others say it mourns. But all agree on one thing: someone still lives there. And if you listen closely enough, you can hear him breathing just on the other side of the door.